Oh, come on, work. Jump.
The year is 1996. Space Jam is in theaters, and the Macarena would be the #1 song in America for 14 straight weeks. And it was also the year a man in Washington state would have his life ruined while simultaneously changing the world of ufology forever. His story has also become a fan favorite among the coast-to-coast Art Bell community, yet still polarizes critics and skeptics alike to this day. This is the story of Dr. Jonathan Reed, the man who claimed to have killed an alien and lived to tell the tale. And it's also the story of how the government pulled an amazing cover-up in plain sight. During mid-October, Dr. Jonathan Reed, a child psychiatrist for Washington Medical Center, was on a nature walk with his loyal golden retriever Susie up in the Cascade Mountains, about 60 miles away from Seattle, Washington. He had parked his Jeep and had walked about an hour and a half away from it, taking some basic supplies like food, a pocket knife, cameras, and a thermal blanket. He and Susie had gone on one of the main trails, but then took a detour away from it. It was an overcast afternoon day, but otherwise no different than any other. Dr. Reed, in subsequent interviews, would describe this as having been a regular hobby of his. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and this hike was no different than the ones he had gone on time and time again. That is until Susie suddenly bolted ahead of him and out of his sight. Initially to Reed, this wasn't too strange, as Susie would regularly chase after squirrels or raccoons, but then things began to fall apart. There was soon cause for concern, as her barking soon became yelping, prompting Reed to rush over. He was afraid she may have encountered a bear or a cougar, both of which call these mountains home. In caution, he grabbed a very large, heavy piece of wood and rushed forward. When he caught up to the yelping of Susie, it was in fact much, much worse, because he walked in on Susie biting the arm of a short grayish humanoid, which was about the size of a child and wearing a full-body black outfit. And this thing was also vibrating, describing it moving like a paint shaker. Every limb was moving so fast that it was just a blur of motion. This alien then ripped Susie open by the jaws, pulling her apart, and a fleshy pseudopod, being a temporary arm-like protrusion, extended from the alien's suit and stabbed into her body. And following that puncture, Susie then swirled into it like a micro-black hole.
And all of a sudden, Susie started to fold in on herself, her body literally creasing into herself. And she fell to the ground and basically died in front of my eyes.
Dr. Reed describes it like water swirling into the drain of a sink. Pretty soon, only white ash remained of his once faithful companion. The creature then saw him and stopped vibrating. It's then that Reed then leapt forward and struck this being across the head, seemingly killing it. This whole event only spanned 15 to 20 seconds, and even though now it was over, he was still stuck in an absolute panic with adrenaline coursing through his veins. Jonathan Reed had just experienced the psychological equivalent of a flashbang. All of his senses were on overdrive, but still, he had no idea what was happening. He just watched an unrecognizable humanoid the size of a child rip apart and kill his dog in a gruesome way, and then he himself killed this being and was now standing over his corpse. He was trapped in this confusion for 3 hours, trying to digest what just transpired.
Well, I had definitely an emotional breakdown as far as not knowing what had happened. At first, I thought I had killed a child, and I had to make sure that this wasn't a child.
He would find himself continually unable to stand or move around for too long, as he had panic attacks of shock. It's worth noting that what may be the first contact with extraterrestrial life went less like this, and more like this. In the first hour of feeling sick and being unable to walk, and going through this extreme shock, Reed began to hear something distant, like a humming noise.
I noticed a sound in the air that almost felt like it touched my skin. It almost gave me goosebumps. And I followed that sound because I thought it might be another person. thought it might be somebody who could help me, because I needed help. At that point, I needed help.
He then made his way towards this noise, but it wasn't a person, it was a thing. This obelisk, as he had begun calling it, wasn't hovering in a shaky way like a boat on water. Reed describes it as being locked into place within the air itself. Reed then approached the craft, and as he got within 30 feet of it, he began again to feel shock and panic, because, once more, nothing was making sense to him. He touched the craft, describing it as icy cold to the touch, and having a feel of marble or granite.
It was making a humming sound, and when I touched it, the sound stopped. And as I pulled my hand back, I noticed that it changed its tone slightly, and it became less irritating, the sound, almost a harmonic.
It was roughly 75 feet away from the encounter with the creature, and hovering between 36 inches to 48 inches off the ground. At one point he fell and caught himself with one hand upon it, slapping it, but strangely this made no noise at all, and it was so cold that it burned his hand, much like dry ice would. Returning from the craft to the body, Reed then pulled out his cameras. This is when the now famous footage was taken of the corpse on the ground, and the craft ominously hovering in the brush. The black floating craft seemed to emit some kind of interference, which caused visual distortions to the camera. Reed claimed he had to get very far away from it to then take more clear photographs, which he did. But then, Reed was left wondering what to do with the corpse. He contemplated using the thermal blanket he brought with him to cover it, and weigh down the sides with rocks, hoping to preserve it against curious or hungry animals overnight. Finding that given it was a mountainous region, and that any large rocks were too deep in the dirt to dig out with just his hands, he opted to wrap this corpse in a blanket, much like a burrito. It's here that he realized just how light this being was. He estimated it to be no more than 55 pounds. And weirdly, he then dragged this blanket-wrapped corpse down the trail, looking for an optimal place to put it or hide it. But he soon realized he just walked all the way back to his car. In many subsequent interviews, Reed said at this point he noticed that his watch had stopped and that the trip back to his car felt much shorter than the trip away from the car, and that his shirt, which at some point had ripped, was no longer ripped. From here, he placed the mylar blanket-wrapped corpse in the back of his Jeep and drove it all the way back home, only making a stop at the local ranger station, but to find no one there. And upon getting to his home, he placed the body, still wrapped up, within his horizontal garage freezer. He then called his girlfriend, leaving her a message to call him, and then called his best friend, Gary, also leaving him a message to call him or come over immediately. He tried to distract his mind, but after 8 hours, he removed the wrapped corpse from the freezer and got his video camera out and made the next major bit of footage. Here, he unwraps the mylar thermal blanket to record a more up-close examination of this corpse, making a video 8 minutes in length. As the camera is placed closer, we can now get a better look at this alien. Dr. Reed touches the face and opens the mouth. He then moves to the eyes and attempts to pry them open. He describes this with Art Bell.
Anyway, I was trying to open the eyelids, and the tissue that made up the eyelid and the muscle was very, very tough. Facial structure of this creature was very old looking, very coarse skin, almost like a pig's skin.
Yeah, and you can see veins, clearly, or what we would think of veins anyway.
Right. The neck was exposed to all of the different muscles, and you could see subcutaneous veins and or some of the ligaments actually in the neck.
He says the skin was very tough and old-looking, and being almost like a pinkish blue in the woods, but later becoming a brownish pinkish blue after being removed from the freezer. Interestingly, while the head is being interacted with, you can hear strange gurgling. Many have speculated that this was air escaping from the mouth, or it could have been hints that this thing wasn't dead, as originally thought. Gary, his friend, would eventually come over to Reed's home and be in disbelief of his story until he was shown the body. They would both return the following day to the area of the woods where the encounter had taken place, only to find everything bizarrely normal and nothing out of place. From this point on, Gary and Reed would analyze this creature in more detail. They also took samples from the corpse. Remember this for later because we're going to get to that. They found the mouth to have needle-like teeth, and it had a blue-gray tongue inside. The being stood 4.5 feet tall, and he said it was about 53 inches exactly. The eyes were a dark pinkish color, and it smelled like rotting fruit, oddly enough. Gary and Reed then moved their attention to the latex-like full-body suit the creature had on, and discovered it too was equally mysterious. He describes the suit as being entirely seamless and adhering to the being's skin. At first glance, he said the alien appeared to have 3 fingers, but when they felt through the clothes, it was more like a 3-fingered oven mitt, and 5 fingers were felt inside. Reed also said no genitals appeared to be present. Dr. Reed tells Art Bell that in subsequent, allegedly now confiscated recordings, he and Gary examined the clothes of the alien closer and attempted to cut into it with an X-Acto knife.
And you tried to cut into it, didn't you?
Yes, in a later examination with Gary, which we videotaped and audio taped, we attempted to cut into the fabric, and I used an X-Acto knife and made an incision in the fabric about 4 to 5 inches, and within a second it started to almost gelatinize and come together.
Sort of
form itself.
Yeah, sort of an instant healing.
On the 3rd attempt at cutting it, the fabric adhered to the knife, stopping it from cutting further. On the 4th day of having this corpse in his possession, Reed arranged a more thorough examination of the corpse with someone that worked at the university nearby, only to have that person mysteriously cancel on the day they had scheduled for. As he walked around his home frustrated, he heard a strange noise from the garage. He initially thought it might be the compressor of the refrigerator going out, but the true source of this noise was far more terrifying, because it was the creature, and it wasn't dead. And this is what he claims is the alien screaming as he opened the fridge top. He described the scream as follows on Art Bell.
Do you feel like something was pushing against your chest? It felt like the air was moving.
During this time, Reed also claimed that he would occasionally interact with and try to communicate with Freddy, as he began to refer to it. It was at this point that Gary and Dr. Reed had become aware that they were also being followed and stalked, because very soon after Gary became involved with Reed, they had called various ufology groups, including MUFON, asking them what to do if, hypothetically, they had an alien corpse. Looking back at this moment, Reed recounts that he had talked to people alleging to be MUFON representatives, and talked to them and gave them information, but it turned out they were never actually affiliated with MUFON. And from this point on, and each day after, forces of a greater government machine would progressively make their moves on Dr. Reed and Gary, closing in on them day by day. Cars were now following Gary and Dr. Reed.
One van followed us for about 15-20 miles. It looked literally like a porcupine because it had so many antennas across the top of it.
One of them actually tried to run you off the road, didn't it?
2 of them have tried to run us off the road.
Really?
And almost successfully.
Reed then decided to break up some of the evidence that he had among different people, including one person he referred to as Dolly. But as he became more and more aware of something closing in on him, Reed had gone to Dolly's home only to find her dead and the evidence he had given her missing. On about the 9th or 10th day following the encounter in the woods, Reed drove up to his home to see 3 vans parked outside.
I basically had been driving back to my house in the evening and realized that there were 3 large step vans parked in front of my house and people going in and out them with hand trucks, with men dressed in like moving attire, like similar to a jumpsuit.
Right.
And I kept going, and then later came back early in the morning to my house being just completely torn apart.
And that same day, Gary also went missing. He briefly returned to his house after the raid, and what he saw was a terrible sight. There were holes in the wall, in the ceiling, the floor, the furniture, the yard, and various things had been taken.
Yeah, they had ransacked my house. They had taken all my files that didn't pertain to anything to do with this. I mean, books that I had saved for years, school books, school papers. And finally I walked to the garage. Now this was after a day later, after I had seen the vans at the house.
Right.
And I walked to the garage. The garage door had literally been taken off its hinges, pried literally out of the wall.
And the freezer?
And the freezer was gone.
Jonathan Reed's landlord had this to say on the Art Bell program.
Well, it was a mess inside. What was unusual to me was the house had attic access and it had a crawl space,
Right.
yet somebody had cut an access right through the floor. They had also cut an access through the ceiling in a couple of spots.
Really?
Everything that had been hanging on the walls was gone, was off the walls.
And on the floor or just gone?
Some things, there was kind of a central pile where things had been kind of piled in one spot. There were some things missing. All of the electrical outlet covers
Yes?
were off.
What?
Yeah, all of the telephone outlet covers were off. The face to the electrical panel was off. The toilet had been lifted off of the wax ring and was sitting alongside the toilet. It was weird.
By this time, Reed had realized he was debanked, discredited from his university, and removed from his job as a researcher from Washington Medical Center. He had now been unpersoned and was now on the run. For a year, he would be homeless and just barely scraping by. He was pushed to the edge of sanity itself. He now existed on the periphery of society. Or rather, he didn't exist at all, and was being tortured by something at a distance to which he was powerless to fight back against. During this time, he mentally descended into darkness. He was soon contemplating taking his own life. That is, until there was a light in the darkness. Reed alleges that there was a mysterious group that wanted to help him, and would connect him to a man named Robert Wraith, a freelance author and a man who would help him get his story out to the public. It was this man who appeared by Dr. Reed's side in both of his initial Art Bell interviews, as well as his subsequent publicity tour.
Want to take a ride?
In 1998, Robert Wraith would send a fax to the late-night talk show host Art Bell, host of Coast to Coast AM, saying, "Want to take a ride?" He would then be invited to appear in the program with Dr. Reed for the very first time, and broadcast his encounter in the woods to the world. They would present the story as I presented it to you now, along with more details on the craft and the alien. On the second appearance a week later, Art Bell would even open up the lines to unvetted callers for an impromptu Q&A of Dr. Reed, who then answered questions with specificity and detail. Robert Wraith and Reed also announced here that they would be publishing a book called Link, An Extraterrestrial Odyssey. For a man who had fallen so hard from who he once was that he almost took his own life, things were now optimistic. That was until March of 1999, when he was shot in a parking lot. Reed had gone to San Diego to present his evidence to the San Diego UFO Society and then returned back to a place he was staying at in Canada. After going out to have breakfast one morning, a man in a jogging suit approached Dr. Reed and pulled out a gun and pushed him against his car. Reed grabbed his gun and it went off, going through his upper left shoulder and the bullet breaking into 3 fragments and leaving his body. This man appeared to be surprised, as though it wasn't his intention to actually shoot Dr. Reed, but he then calmly holstered his gun back into his jacket and walked away, not having said a word the entire experience. Reed alleges he didn't go to the hospital, as someone in his new entourage helping him hide was a medical doctor, and he opted to stay with him as he recovered. Now, I want to pull you away real quick, this is where the story goes off the rails. This is where Dr. Reed's story would change and become more nonsensical, because this, in my opinion, is how the government planned to cover up his story from the very beginning. This gunshot changed everything, and why is that? Because immediately after this, Reed would begin saying how he actually now had more evidence, an alien bracelet, and tissue samples. Reed would now claim that he actually found a bracelet during the original encounter in the woods that he hadn't spoken about. When he hit the alien, it came off, and it was still in his possession. And the tissue samples? Well, now apparently a microbiologist had studied tissue samples of the alien, which were unknown to exist by Reed because, actually, they were sent by Gary, who never told Reed about it, leading to a Mr. Harold Chacon to contact a Wraith and also contact Reed after their Art Bell appearance, claiming to have received these tissue samples and studied them. Allegedly, there were 4 samples sent in: skin, brain matter, muscle, and blood. Interestingly, the blood samples showed very high copper content, something that would imply a link to cattle mutilation.
Copper sulfate?
Right, yeah. The copper sulfate traces, there were white and red-black corpuscles, what they're called corpuscles, with an elongated nucleus.
God, I want to stop you for just a second and remind my audience that in a recent significant interview we did on animal mutilations, they found missing from the cows what? Copper. The copper content, I think in the liver, if I'm remembering correctly, was almost entirely missing.
And the creature had 46 chromosomes, just as we did, but 9 were not human and were instead more commonly found to be associated with aquatic sea turtles and dolphins. Now, this is fascinating, but I have to point out that Reed seemingly did not know this man existed, or these samples existed, or were even sent away by Gary, until after Chacon contacted them and claimed this to be the case. Now, that's kind of strange, isn't it? An outside source is now attaching new information that's not coming from Reed to Reed's story. And this aside, let's talk about the bracelet. Reed's otherwise consistent story now became less and less about the footage he took in the woods and his life falling apart after, and more about this mysterious alien bracelet called the Link Artifact, and a mysterious group called the Alliance, who was fighting back against the government, and had artifacts like this in their collection. Reed would claim that he put this artifact on, and it would teleport him into a mysterious, extra-dimensional area where there were beings of pure light. Now, obviously, this is an outright lie. In fact, during the Q&A session with Art Bell, he was explicitly asked if he had any more evidence, and he said no.
All right, here's somebody asking, Art, please ask the doctor if he has any physical evidence still in his possession. The blanket, blood stains from the alien, on any of your clothes, hair fibers from the dog Susie that could be substituted for PCR or other more specific DNA testing.
No, I do not.
It's all gone.
It's gone.
In fact, his story was consistent, and his witness, being his landlord, came off as honest and only added credibility. The details he talked about were very realistic and plausible, but now they aren't. Now, this is where a lot of people who look at this case throw their hands up and go, "Guess he was lying after all." But what if I told you Jonathan Reed's footage was real, and he was forced to discredit himself publicly? That the government knew killing him would be too easy, and the best way to cover up this case would be to make him lie like this. Schizo checkpoint ahead. A tinfoil hat is required beyond this point because we are going in one level deeper. First, let me put this in perspective. Dr. Jonathan Reed is a middle-class man, upper middle class at best. If the government is interested in silencing honest witnesses of the paranormal, they'll have a budget in the hundreds of millions and employ career experts in sabotage, subterfuge, and manipulation. The CIA has an amazing track record of success overseas in all 3 of these things. It isn't far-fetched to say they could readily apply these skills domestically if they deemed it a matter of national security, such as, covering up a legitimate alien encounter. When they found Reed, they used threats and intimidation against him. When that didn't work, they discredited him, ruined his life, and blacklisted him from society. And when they put him on the edge of existence when he was homeless and on the run, they threw him a lifesaver in the form of Robert Wraith and the Alliance. But it wasn't an honest lifesaver, it was one of their design. They wanted the story to hide in plain sight. Even Robert Wraith said something kind of like this in one of their public speakings.
We have to continue to do this. There are people out there that really want it to stop. And their way of doing it isn't necessarily to kill you, is to torture you and crush you, because if they kill you, they make you a martyr. They'd rather see you destroyed.
This story would get out to the public, but it would be how they wanted to tell it. If they just killed Reed, he would be a martyr. It's a far better choice to just embarrass him so everyone knows about the case, but also gets convinced that it was a hoax all along. Reed was now in the crosshairs of a giant industrial intelligence machine that he never stood a chance against from the beginning. Now, that's enough yapping from me. Let's get back to Reed's saga, because it keeps going. Following the shooting, he began a publicity tour where he spoke to the public showing his evidence to the world, and there were a number of strange things I noticed. In 2000, Reed would appear along with Robert Wraith at the International UFO Congress, but there were some weird things that happened here. For instance, he spoke of government agents he knew of being in the crowd.
Oh, and before we start, I have one other question. How many of you are currently working or have worked for any member of our government or any other? Let's see a show of hands. Well, to some of you who aren't raising your hand, and I know of 3 of you that are here, I have one thing to say to you folks. And that is, I'm here in spite of your actions, in spite of trying to keeping me from talking about this. And I will tell my story, no matter what.
And he and Robert would sporadically burst into tears throughout this particular lecture.
This is a time for exploration, not to be squandered on character assassination. This man has been through enough.
Because it's ruined my life. I have nothing left. I am dealing with the only things I can handle, which is a day-to-day circumstance.
Reed would do various public speaking events for years and appear on shows like the Mexican variety show Otro Rollo in 2001 and Syfy's
Sci-Fi
Fact or Faked Paranormal Files in 2010, where they attempted to recreate his footage and kind of called him a liar to his face. He even became associated with Jaime Maussan, the man currently presenting the Nazca mummies to the world. And eventually he met a man named Dan McAvoy, who would join their entourage during their public tours. And this, my friends, is a major glowy.
Just to give you a few seconds about my background briefly, I served in the United States Army as a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division in an airborne reconnaissance unit. After that, a military advisor attached to the JFK Center for Special Warfare at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I'm an expert in infantry weapons, small unit tactics, jungle warfare, and Arctic warfare.
What stands out to me, though, is this man's introduction in relation to Reed. In particular, he would mention explicitly about how he personally saw Reed vanish into the air after putting on the alien bracelet, and would mention this story again and again. My conclusion? He was a government handler to Reed to make sure he kept in line with the disinformation campaign that Reed was being forced to do. I want to highlight Reed's body language during one appearance where McAvoy is talking about this story. Reed is staring daggers at this man the whole time. And then when Robert Wraith begins to say how he also put on the bracelet and was teleported away, Reed literally sinks his face into his hand and shakes his head. He knows it's bullshit, and he hates it. And this whole bracelet thing really peaked when Dr. Reed went on a supposed TV program to put on the bracelet and demonstrate himself teleporting away. Behold.
Feel it in my chest. It's painful, but if I hold my chest, it has a tendency to be less painful, and then they make the decision whether
Now, obviously this is fake. Obviously that's a stock footage studio audience reaction noise, but that's the point. It was supposed to look fake. It's important for the cover-up that Dr. Reed looked like a fucking idiot. He would reappear on Art Bell's radio programs well into the future, and his story became more and more nonsensical. He would now make claims of meeting the Pope, being in continual psychic communication with the alien that he hit with a branch, and talking to beings of pure light called the Elders.
I have been sought out by science groups and universities all around the world. I have spoken to heads of state and heads of countries about this. I was invited by the Vatican 1 month ago to speak with the new Pope.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
And that, my friends, is how you do a cover-up. You reduce a man to a shell of his former self, offer him a savior, boost up his ego, and tell him he will lead the charge against the elite who do this evil to others, only to trap him in a den of snakes. By the time he realizes what you've done, you've already placed him in checkmate and the game is over. You've won.
But lately, Dr. Reed was debunked by UfoWatchDog.
Can we talk about UfoWatchDog? I've been wanting to talk about UfoWatchDog all day. In doing research for this video, I came across a website called UfoWatchdog.com. Back in the early 2000s, the author of this website dedicated a lot of time to debunking Jonathan Reed, or so he claims. He claims he was contacted by a man named Bill Werner, who was in fact a longtime friend of Dr. Reed. Wow, how convenient. And Jonathan Reed is actually a bumbling fool named Jonathan Rudder, a man who lies a lot in fact. He was personally obsessed with the X-Files and Art Bell, and would propagate lies to his friends and fiancé about him being a child psychiatrist at Washington Medical Center, or how he worked on a code for encryption which NASA forced him to discontinue. But in reality, according to Royce Myers, the author of this website, he was spending $4,000 a month via fraudulent credit cards taken out under various false pseudonyms, while simultaneously having no verifiable source of income. And mysteriously, he would appear to work at an auto repair shop at night. Oh, and Robert Wraith and Chacon the microbiologist? They were actually gas station clerks. Wow, thanks Bill, I trust you. You're totally not just some guy making a lot of claims that can't be backed up. Myers would then claim that he, through this Bill Werner, suddenly came into contact with a bunch of people who knew this guy. Wow, what luck. He would uncover facts, like not only did Reed not have pets like Susie, he would actually have really bad allergies which would make even being around dogs and cats very difficult. Case closed, right? Someone tracked down people that actually knew this man and he was lying all along? Well, no. Are you familiar with Scientology's smear websites? Scientology has two things, a lot of money and a lot of critics. You know who else has that? The US government. When people tend to criticize Scientology, Scientology makes websites using their name as the URL, so the first thing people find when they search for that person on the internet is their website. And what's on it? Well, relentless slander and defamation. When it comes to UfoWatchdog and its author Royce Myers, we are really taking his word for it that all these people really contacted him. Trust me, bro. A lot of the claims made here by Myers are, quite frankly, not verifiable. He himself is putting a lot of trust into a bunch of absolutely random people who suddenly approached him and then claimed to know Dr. Reed. And there's no evidence that any of these people are who they say they are when talking to him. So, in other words, it's not the smoking gun of debunking this case. Now, me personally, I'm not married to the idea of the Reed case being true. I'm actually open-minded to being convinced that it's false. But in looking into this case, I wasn't. This case may be a smoking gun in ufology, but we almost can't determine what is true and what is deliberately a lie. I won't take off my shirt and begin beating my chest and rant about globalists, but it is genuinely an info war. When you enter the world of aliens, you also enter a world of black budget cover-ups, men in black, and intentional disinformation. There's very smart people being paid a lot of money to lie to you, and they are very good at doing it. A genuinely honest case with genuine honest evidence will only come to you after coming through the boys upstairs first, and it's important to remember this as you study ufology going forward. Always ask yourself, okay, I may believe this case might be true, but what are the lies I'm not seeing? And that's what I took away from this case. But what do you think? This has been Lately. See you next time.